everyone. Good evening. How you feeling?
I got
Good?
two waters
We have two waters. We're privileged.
and a gavel.
Well, welcome to tonight's program at the Commonwealth Club. My name is Erika Aguilar. I'm a senior editor for affordable housing, housing affordability, I should say, at KQED. Excited to be here, excited to be on stage, especially with our guest, New York Times journalist Connor Doherty. Thanks for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. Or thank you for agreeing to do this with me. Is that what I
Of
should
course.
say?
I mean, when they asked, I was like, yeah, I'm already reading this. This is on my bedstand right now. So as you guys probably all know, and it's why you're here, Connor is a Bay Area-based economic reporter who's focused on issues surrounding the real estate area here in the Bay Area, in California, nationwide. He's focused his writing on gentrification, wage deflation, and between his decade for working with the Wall Street Journal to now his book, which is titled Golden Gates, Fighting for Housing in America. If you've not had it, that's what it looks like, and he'll be signing some books later. Connor has really established himself as one of the nation's leading writer, analysis, just someone who's watching what is going on in California as we experience what is a housing shortage and an affordability crisis. Golden Gates focuses on our own city here in San Francisco, and it labels, the Bay Area as this epicenter of the West Coast, of what's going on with what we're experiencing with housing and all the crunch here. The book also discusses the current moment of extreme wealth and inequality, insecurity in housing, homelessness, decades of policy and anti-growth. It introduces you to characters who've been working on this issue and uses what I appreciate as a journalist, narrative-based storytelling, to really explain what is often a very wonky, topic.
Yeah, totally.
Housing policy, and it just, it serves as a cautionary, maybe to other countries, but other
Other
states,
countries too.
perhaps.
Maybe not. Who knows?
Well, we're very excited for having you here. Thank you again. And let's get started with some, I want to get started with some news. Yesterday was elections. Most of you, I hope, went out to the polls and made your decisions. But California voters went for Senator Bernie Sanders. But locally here in San Francisco, we had a couple of proposition measures. One that limited, it's going to limit office development when housing goals aren't met. And San Jose has now a real estate transfer tax that they say is going to be used to build affordable housing in the Bay Area and their city. And in San Diego, some voters there seem to have rejected a measure that would have allowed housing in a part of a country, part of the county there, that's zoned rural or semi-rural. Connor, I wanted to find out what you make of some of these local measures and what you just made. I know you were watching because I was following you on Twitter.
I was kind of watching.
Tell me what you make.
You and I were both watching and loving that Texas and California were the only two things anybody cared about last.
As a native Texan,
Yes.
I was very appreciative.
Yes.
And as a home to California, I was like, yes, we are on the spotlight here. But what did you make of last night's election results? And what does it sort of tell you about the things that you write about?
So I can't make any prognostications about Bernie Sanders or whatever, because I'm not allowed to talk about anything that the Upshot writes about. No, I'm kidding. But I just see chaos and people trying to figure it out. I feel like any one election, what always makes me laugh, people make fun of me for this, but I'm an economics reporter and I came to this as thinking about shelter and the economy. Mm-hmm. And then I said to somebody when I first started writing the book, I was like, man, there's a lot of politics in this. It's so weird. And people were like, what, housing? Are you kidding me? And I was like, I just never really thought about it,
That's interesting.
because I had spent so much time thinking about it purely as a higher macro issue. Mm-hmm. But I see all these people trying to figure this out, figuring out how to pay for affordable housing, figuring out where to put any housing, figuring out what policies will have the effects they want them to have, or what policies are doing the opposite of what they think it's going to do.
Right.
And I talk about this in the book. Jerry Brown in the 1980s passed a bunch of bills that were designed to end the housing problem. Clearly, that did not work out the way people thought about it. And you can go find old articles of Dianne Feinstein when she was mayor, promising that homelessness will be ended by Christmas of like that year.
Wow.
So there have been all these moments where we've been kind of like perennially dealing with this, and it feels like right now. And I know what your last question is. So we're going to circle back here by the end. But it feels like right now you're seeing just everyone focused on it, and whether it's a transfer tax or where we're going to put housing, and it's like chaotic, but it's mainly the only thing we're dealing with and talking about in this state, and even to it is now penetrating a little bit, not as much as I would like the presidential campaigns. Joe Biden finally released his housing plan. He was the last one to do that.
That's right.
So it seems like everyone is at least agreeing on what the problem is.
Yeah.
And that alone is progress.
I think, polls that have recently been done in the last month or so have shown that Californians say housing and homelessness is their top two major concerns in the state, and want the governor and the legislature to work on that. So I think we're right on the money on that one. Your book focuses on a lot of the Bay Area. There are a lot of different cities in the Bay Area that you go to. And in it, you write that the city in San Francisco is just an exaggerated example of the geographic inequalities that are rising in tandem with global income and wealth gaps. This line to me, and I tweeted it out this morning too, was like, this line to me was a warning that other regions, not just in California, but across the country, that if cities ignore growth needs along with promoting economic booms, that this maybe is what you might be getting. Is that the warning that you're trying to maybe send out in the message of your book?
Yeah, it's a couple things. So for a long time, and I of course think this is completely valid, California has been seen as like an early look at the nation's future.
Sure.
And typically that was an optimistic vision. Maybe it's like now a warning vision. It's a cautionary tale, as you say. But I really don't think of this as a Bay Area book. I think of it as a book about housing and cities. Mm-hmm. So in our economy right now, and this is not some Bay Area thing, we have high inequality. And some of that's due to policies and stuff like that, and we should totally be working on all that. But a lot of it's also due to the economy just kind of bifurcating into what are called like knowledge workers, people who tend to do relatively well and work with their mind in some capacity. Mm-hmm. It could be entertainment. It could be obviously building software platforms or tech. It could be medical research, that type of thing. But this knowledge piece of our economy, which tends to be higher paid and higher productivity, is like one pole. And then the other side is like the service economy, people like dog walkers or SoulCycle instructors, or of which we have many in this area, and people who clean houses, people who watch after children, people who watch after the elderly. I moved back to the Bay Area because my mom was dying of Alzheimer's here, and paying for that kind of care, and now I have two children. That is like a huge piece of our economy that people couldn't function without. So those are kind of our poles of the economy, and we don't have as much of a middle class, which was typically manufacturing back in the day. That's what we thought of that as being a middle wage job,
factory
right?
work.
Those two groups of people not only are kind of the symbols of the economy bifurcating into what they call the barbell economy now, like two big poles and then a little rail of middle class, they have to be next to each other because knowledge workers tend to want to work to be near each other. That's why Google and Facebook and have like lunch on campus and
To
stuff like
share
that.
ideas.
They think that they're sharing ideas. There's all this stuff they can't measure, and what they can't measure is how ideas are transferred, and that when people are just like kind of near each other face to face, they just like seem to
Creativity.
do that better.
Right, you can't measure that.
And then service type people are basically waiting on these people. They are creating. Their service is a personal service. It's I'm watching after your kid. I'm taking care of your parent or grandparent. It is I am walking your dog. Yeah,
Ooh,
very important one. I see them up and down the street.
Yeah.
And so that is what our economy looks like. Our housing market need, whatever, our housing, I guess market is the best way to put it, does not look anything like that. And so it's chaos because you have
everyone needs a house.
well, but we do not have, we have wages for people that are at a lower end of the income spectrum. We certainly have an economy that rests on those people. It would fall apart if people couldn't watch after. The woman who looks after my kid was sick for 3 days, and we worked it out, but it was like really hard, you know. We gave her lots of time to get ready, or to get herself better. But our housing, there's no housing for that huge, important piece of our economy. And that is not some Bay Area thing, because all around the country, you see these kind of knowledge workers pulling away. All around the country, you see tremendous needs for all the things robots can't do. And all around the country, this people who are on the lower end of the income spectrum are either getting crowded in more and more, or they're moving further and further out. And enduring what are called super commutes, which is a commute over 3 hours.
Right.
So,
or they're paying more than 30% of their income, which
yes,
is
a quarter of
cost
tenants
burden.
spend half their income on rent. So, the Bay Area, because it's symbolic of this, and has the big tech industry and a horrible housing problem, is probably the best place to tell this story. But my wife is from Minneapolis. My wife, who's right here, is from Minneapolis. And we go there. I always call it my surrogate city for 2 weeks each summer. They have a huge housing problem there. It's not as bad as ours, but I was just in Minneapolis for a conference at the Federal Reserve there, and they were saying this is the main thing they're talking about now. It's the main thing they're worried about. Minneapolis just became the first major city in America to get rid of single-family zoning, and what that means is you can build three units on any plot now in the city. So you're even seeing, I think Nebraska just passed a big zoning law.
And a lot of our country is zoned for single family.
Totally. So the Bay Area, I think, was a great place to tell this story because it's kooky, so it does provide some entertainment value, and it's bad. And it's further along that the policy is like you're getting a better sense of how this plays out with a really robust tenants' rights movement finally erupting, probably as big as it's been since like the 70s. You're seeing things like SB 50, which was this statewide proposal to make it possible to build
Density,
like 4 to
housing.
8 story apartment buildings within a half mile of any train stop or
Job center, yeah.
Yeah. So we're further along, but we're not unique
Yeah.
as much as we want to be unique.
I hear it from my family who are out in Texas
Yeah.
who are worried about, rent increases.
Well, even like Dallas, which was kind of like this really, really, really affordable place. They're starting, I mean, it's still much cheaper than here, but the prices are going up a lot from where they were just a couple of years ago.
That's super interesting. One of the stories you tell in the book is about a development in Lafayette. It's
Proposed.
One of my,
Proposed.
a proposed one. You're right. It's one of my favorite.
There's nothing there yet.
Because so this development is slated for 315 apartments, or was slated for 315 apartments. Was like way more than what residents wanted there. I believe they wanted 4 on this lot.
On a 22-acre lot.
Right.
It's not like a lot, like this little thing.
Yeah. Well, you used the city manager there as a character to tell this story, much because he was the one who was negotiating the development there. Why did you choose to highlight this story, and what do you think it says?
So one of the things I tried to do in this book is interweave all these stories so that you never knew who anyone was. Sometimes someone's the hero, sometimes they're the villain, sometimes you're not sure how to feel about them. You find out, so one of the other stories, just to go off track for a small second, and then I'll get back to Lafayette. One of the other stories in the book is this 15-year-old girl who comes home one day and discovers that there's an $800 rent increase in her house, or in her 2-bedroom apartment. And she...
Is this one down in the peninsula?
Yes, down in the peninsula. And so she organizes... she doesn't know what she's doing. She's not like from some like group, but she organizes this apartment building to fight the landlord. ends up organizing another apartment building to fight the landlord. I should note this is a young Latino girl whose mom does elder care, cleans houses, and moonlights as a janitor. So she's like the woman who cleans your house, the woman who watches after your grandparent, and then the woman who's like wheeling the trash can in as you're leaving the office.
The service workers that you
Yeah,
were just
she's like all
talking
those
about.
people in one day. So she obviously has no capacity to organize, so her daughter takes it upon herself to do that. Okay. They eventually, spoiler, I hope you guys already bought books. They do lose their apartment. In the course, but then you get to meet the family that moves into that apartment. And then you discover you've actually met them much earlier in the book. You weren't expecting them to be the family that that is going to occupy their apartment.
Yeah.
Right? You know, you're like, wait, I thought that family was struggling too, and of course they were. And anyway, so interweaving those stories so you never know who anyone is like, I hope you remember that you had met that family earlier in the book. But anyway, so the city manager
In Lafayette.
in Lafayette, there was this group of people in the Bay Area who had started, I'm really going off track here, but there was this woman, I swear we're going to get back to Lafayette. I'm telling you.
Well, I think what
There
you're
was
trying
this-
to say
well,
is
I'm
that
trying-
they're always interrelated.
Well, but I'm telling you truly, honestly, why I picked him. So there is this woman in the Bay Area who many people around here may have heard of, named Sonia,
Yeah,
who started a group called the Bay Area Renters Federation, or BARF. And she had started organizing people to fight for more housing in the Bay Area,
What year was that?
about 2011. So,
It's about the time, that rents were starting to hike up here.
yes, I'm sorry. It was about 2013. She had been here since 2011.
Right.
So she is reading about this law. So then one day she reads about this development in Lafayette. And what had happened in Lafayette was there was a big parcel not too far from BART. And this parcel had been zoned for high density development for many, 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 many years. They had this written in a bunch of city plans.
Right.
And this developer, but this old kind of hermit character lived on it, and they never really thought he'd do anything with it. But then he died, and like that, somebody proposed like a 315 unit apartment development on it.
Yes.
The city, of course, goes nuclear. The city manager.
residents.
Yes. And the city manager goes and goes to the developer and basically says, look, people are going berserk. Can we just like work something out? And
Which I might say is kind of like a strategy when we think
Definitely.
about development projects. A developer would come up, says, I want to build 400 stuff, right? And everyone's like,
Yes.
nah, I'm going to give you 100. And they say, why don't we shake hands on 200? And we're done.
Totally. So, but the developer threatened to sue them because it is illegal in California to zone something out from under someone. Like if you zone your property and you say, look, we're going to put affordable housing there, the second someone proposes that on it, you can't be like, oh, actually, we didn't really want affordable housing there. That's illegal.
No takebacks.
Yes. Yeah. Well, no, it's called the Housing Accountability Act. Anyway, so
There you
but even if you don't know anything about the Housing Accountability, you can basically get the idea. Like if you say this goes there, the way I say it is this: it's illegal for you not to follow your own laws.
Right. Don't change.
So that is the rule. So, and I think it's almost like, and you think about it, it's almost like a reneging on a contract. You don't say like, oh, everyone can build this here, this there, and then say, actually, never mind, none of that applies after they propose it. So,
Business and economics.
yes.
Like
So
predictability.
and so this developer had them. Like he had the perfect route to this case, and they knew that he could sue them and win. So the city manager went to him and said, like, look, can we just please work something out, right? So they settled on 44 single-family homes instead of 315 apartments.
That's such a difference.
So I should note, 4 years have passed now. So there's 2 years to even talk about the 300, for residents to even have the chance to be pissed off about the 315 unit apartments. Then they say, let's make a deal. 2 more years passed for them to have a chance to be either pissed off or not pissed off about the 44 single family homes. So they're about to have the final city council meeting to propose the 44 single-family homes that is now 4 years long and all this negotiating. And somebody writes an article that says, oh, like a history of the project, and oh, this guy threatened to this Housing Accountability Act. So Sonia's off in San Francisco trying to make her way as an activist, and she sees an article that says Housing Accountability Act. And she goes, huh, I've never heard of that. Opens up a new window on her computer and Google's Housing Accountability Act and goes, huh, I'm going to go sue the city and try to make them build the original 315-unit apartment complex that they've now spent 4 years. And she is not a lawyer. She copies and pastes a Housing Accountability Act lawsuit that pre-exists, just writes new details in. This is good enough that the city freaks out, has to pay her a bunch of money to go away. Because she's done a convincing enough. She did actually eventually find a lawyer to help her with the case.
And I assume the developer was like, wait, but I've got just 44 now.
Yeah, the developer has to pay her to go away because he's now indemnified the project. So he's now argued both sides of the same case. He's threatened to sue the city, and then he's defended the city from Sonia, and he's paid for both sides of the same case. So he's argued and paid for both sides of the same case now.
What?
But after 4 years of buying this land and sitting on it, and filing two separate applications, which are like $1 million each, because they're like this thick. You need multiple lawyers and environmental reports and all this. Okay. Yeah. So Sonia's finally gotten away. So then, no sooner than they get rid of the lawsuit that has sued them for it being too small, another group of neighbors come and sue them for it being too big. Because even after all this negotiating, they're not happy about the 44 single-family homes. Fast forward another year, and they have an election to rescind the city's approval of the 44 single-family. I hope you guys are following.
Lawsuit here, lawsuit
to rescind
there,
the approval of the smaller thing.
Sure.
They have the election. It passes. So they've now undone the 44 single-family home compromise that they've spent 4 years and dismissed another lawsuit working towards. What nobody who voted for this realizes is that the developer had secured an agreement that said, if for some reason this doesn't work out, I get to go build the 315 unit.
And now we're back at square one.
So the first city council meeting they have after this successful election, it was like, we won! The developer shows up and goes, hey, and let's build the 315 unit apartments. So it turned out that it has not been resolved yet.
Oh, see.
But it turned out that they probably voted for the bigger thing by trying to get rid of the smaller thing. And the best part is, in the meantime, Sonia, after losing, goes and convinces with somebody else, Nancy Skinner, who's a state senator from Berkeley, to pass a new law based on them losing the lawsuit that makes it almost impossible to lose a Housing Accountability Act lawsuit. So for the third time, the developer's probably going to file another lawsuit. Wow. So he's now paid for 2 lawsuits. He'll probably file his own. So there you go. He's finally learning how to. So it was a
litigious situation.
But you don't have to be like a hardcore libertarian to say, maybe that's a little much to build. I guess it's 6 years now. It's 8 years now. 8 years, potentially 3 lawsuits, rewriting state law for a parcel that was zoned like 50 years ago for exactly what the developer proposed on it.
And the city manager resigned.
Yes. So the reason I picked this guy after all this talking about is that it intersected 3 stories. He was trying to build, they did declare that they would make part of the thing affordable housing. So we need affordable housing for people like this girl. Sonia's there suing him from one side. So she's earlier in the book, so you get to know her too. And then on top of that, you have this city manager. And so much of what happens with housing is these unelected people who just kind of sit there and run planning departments and, really actually make things happen. Mm-hmm. And I kind of felt like that was a perspective we don't have enough of. A lot of it's all, what bill are we going to pass? But here's the poor guy who has to sit there and actually try to make it work. And I thought that what I loved about that project is all the stories intersect, all the policy intersects. It's weird. And
It's complicated too, and I think
yeah,
that's just reflective of what it means, what it actually takes. Sometimes people ask me like, "Why, we passed this bond. Why isn't housing built next year?" And I was like, "Well, it takes a while to build housing, and you've all of these layers and the lawsuits and stuff that go with it. It takes a really long time, and I think that's what reflective of it." But
yeah.
I want to get to some of your questions and just incorporate them into our conversation.
Oh,
if
okay,
you
never
don't
mind. That's how
mind.
we're going to do it.
So someone's asking, how do those investing in the housing market do it in a responsible manner so that not to exaggerate the current crisis?
I don't know that I have an answer for that, an easy answer for that.
Sure.
So I can say this. What we need in America and in California is what we call missing middle housing. And missing middle means middle class as well as like it looks middle. So giant condos like we have around us right now are not going to be affordable. Once you start getting into subterranean parking and huge glass and steel, that's not going to be affordable. And single family homes just can be affordable. They're not expensive to build, but the land use, the intensity of land use makes it more
value,
expensive. Yeah. So if you have like 3 and 4 story things like you see in Philadelphia, row homes, like that has, without elevators, that has some prayer of being market rate affordable without a subsidy to the person living there. And we need a lot more of that. I think we're actually starting to kind of backdoor build that with things like what are called accessory dwelling units, which are basically homes in the backyard.
Casitas,
Yes,
granny
exactly.
flats.
Find our special name, but it's a home in the backyard. And that, I think we're kind of moving towards things like this, but we need to build more of that kind of like middle housing. And I think that we need to recognize that if we're going to have an economy where you have these service workers and these knowledge workers right next to each other. So here's an image I always think about. This isn't a perfect image, but I think it's a great one.
Should we close our eyes?
Yes, you don't have to close your eyes.
Okay.
How many people in this room, this is going to sound patronizing, but let's just, do it, have seen the Painted Ladies in San Francisco? Or had
That's
a
a lot
postcard,
of
or watched the
hands.
opening of Full House where the Painted Ladies are
Okay,
right
everybody's
there.
hands goes up now, right?
Okay.
Okay.
How many people can, should we do this?
Yeah.
Can someone raise their hand and tell me what is right next to the uppermost painted lady on the, how many people know the answer to that question and raise their hand?
Why don't you tell
It's a
us?
smaller number, but
Go ahead and
tell me
say
what it looks like.
Sir, in the front row. It's an empty
No,
lot.
well, what's pretty much right next to it on the corner? A 7-story apartment building.
Apartment
Yes.
building. Okay.
That is always invariably cropped out of that picture.
Oh, wow.
But
I
it's
never
right
even
there.
noticed.
It is right on it. It is directly next door to the first house in the line of, I think it's 6 or 7.
Wow.
That is what a normal functioning city looks like. That's how a city is used. That's how a city becomes vibrant. But for some reason, we don't like that. We don't want to see that. We want to think that this cute little 7 beautifully painted, colorful homes with the lovely skyline in the background, that's like our
the
vision of what's
uniformity we're
beautiful.
reaching for?
I don't know. But that's what it actually looks like with that giant apartment complex right on it. And that's how it works. That's how the city works. I think we have to kind of like ask ourselves what works.
Yeah. In terms of, are you saying in terms of zoning? Are you saying in terms of funding for it? I mean,
Well, that's like I don't think that we can buy our way out of this crisis. I think we have to try to fund as much affordable housing as we can. But I think, whether we like it or not, many of the things that really accelerate and change things in America are in the private sector. So finding ways to build all sorts of different kinds of housing at all sorts of different kinds of levels, I think is going to be, you're not going to solve it until you do that. I would also note, and this is highly important, the way we build affordable housing, by which we mean subsidized housing, is not it's not substantially different than how we build market rate housing. It has to go through the same process. The only thing that's really different is who writes the check.
Which is a quilt to finance.
Yeah, totally. But so we can make some progress there. But imagine trying to propose an affordable complex, going through 8 years and 7 lawsuits and and then having to tell your funder, oh, I need you to hold on for the 8 years.
And the prices of labor goes up, the prices of lumber goes up, and, time is money. I get that. Well, this reminds me of, this idea earlier, starting last year into this year, we've heard of the chants that were coming out of the Moms for Housing group, who made us really pay attention to the commodification of housing. And some lawmakers that I've been talking to have even told me that they're working on legislation that would ask voters potentially this year, maybe next year, about deciding whether the state constitution should be amended to guarantee a right for housing, or to guarantee or declare that housing is a human right. Is that what's sort of needed, like to decommodify housing and to ensure that people have like a decent place to sleep?
So Moms for Housing, which you're referring to, is a group of women in Oakland who a home had been bought, a vacant home. A family who lived in a home sold the home to somebody who wanted to renovate it and then sell it for more money after renovating it. Flipper is the term that people use. And they occupied this house illegally. It was a kind of, what do you call that? No, but what's the more?
Protest?
Yes, a protest. It's like conscientious object. What do you call like civil disobedience?
I see.
See, that's what. Yes, an act of civil disobedience, and it was very calculated. They knew what they wanted to do in the statement they wanted to make, and they certainly made it. They got a lot of attention and all that. I think that drawing attention to that issue is really important, but. And I think that if we declared in our Constitution, we declared as part of our values that people shouldn't be sleeping on the streets, I think those are all great ideas. If you don't build it, and if everyone fights it, where you try to build it, whether it's affordable or market rate, it seems like that's going to be an empty gesture. I think that people I think at some point they're going to have to recognize that a functioning city looks like the Painted Ladies with a giant apartment building next to it and be okay with that. Mm-hmm. And I don't think any declaration in the Constitution is going to change that.
So interesting, because what another piece of my favorite part of of your book here is you make this really interesting point about San Francisco renters fearing development because of gentrification, but at the same time homeowners fearing development because of property values might go down. And you say, like, isn't this interesting? You put these two things together. How do you overcome that?
I have no idea. That is the question. But there's this. Wait, will you give me the book for a second?
Yeah, of course. With all my notes and
yes. I thought. So everybody here knows and loves our old sage of California, Jerry Brown. And after they passed anybody who's known or listened to Jerry Brown will very much love this. They've just passed a big housing package of bills in 2017.
That's right.
And there's a ton of new money for affordable housing.
Bills.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's the Housing Accountability Act thing that Sonia pushed for.
The amendment, yes.
There's a law that Senator Scott Wiener put forth. It was the precursor to SB 50 that would make it. So there's a combination of like streamlining, funding, and enforcement, and it's all in 15 bills, and they all gather at a affordable housing development in the Bayview, and they got their little desk that they cart around for government signings. And
I remember that.
He comes and gives his speech, and he says, "I can't add anything because it's all been said, but I just can't help adding this one note. We talk about digging a ditch because throughout the thing they've said, we've dug ourselves into a ditch and now we're digging ourselves out. No, it's not a ditch. It's not a ditch. Look, all of these," he's talking to the legislature, All of these rules were passed by people like you. Let's face it. City and state people did all this good stuff. Energy efficiency, better insulation, more this and more that. You name it. It's all good. But, as I always say, too many goods create a bad. So now you're trying to clean up some of the bad, but it is a lot of good too. So that's the paradox. We want to achieve safety and aesthetics and the right kind of neighborhoods and all the rest of that stuff, and we get a lot of rules. So now we got to figure out a way to streamline, and we're doing that in these bills. And we need to fund, because this capitalist system, I mean, it is powerful, but it's so powerful you can't control it. And when people make a lot of money because they have all these apps, they start spending it and bidding up the price of housing, and there we are. So I know none of you want to cut the value of people's homes they struggle to buy. So we're not talking about lowering the prices in one sense, although we are. So there it is. Plenty of paradox, plenty of complexity.
Well done.
So Jerry Brown is sitting there trying to sort of say, people worked really hard to buy their homes. And they didn't do anything wrong. They don't feel like they did anything wrong. The Bay Area is a lovely, wonderful place with a lot of innovation, a lot of opportunity, and people wanted to move there, and the value of their home went up. And though they're certainly very happy about that, I don't think they feel like it's their fault. I don't think they should feel like they should be demonized for having done nothing other than save a lot of money to buy a home that then rocketed up in value.
I also think that they got help in saving a lot of money to buy that home. I mean, we talk
The
about
first people who bought in the 60s and 70s, maybe. I mean, some yes, some no. I mean, a lot of really teachers-owned homes, you know.
the GA bill.
Oh, yeah,
allowed
GI Bill,
for
yeah.
mostly white people, and FHA loan. There was redlining. There's a mortgage interest deduction that isn't given to renters. I mean,
Totally. But what I'm saying, but lots and lots and lots of different people throughout through the Western Addition. There was a lot of homeowners well, we can get into all that, but
Let's do it.
Yes, but what I'm saying is that at some point when you talk about decommodify housing, it's a pretty substantial group of single-family homeowners who of a great many races and a great many places who don't want their house price to go down. And I think the only real way you can realistically get out of it is have it start to grow more slowly. And then 30 years from now, it's just like a more normal, housing is seen as like a bank account
Sure.
rather than an investment. And I think that realistically, that's how you, quote, decommodify housing. I don't think overnight we're going to have some socialist revolution in which we say property doesn't exist anymore. I don't think that California is even capable of passing laws like that because they would be unconstitutional. So I do think we have to remind ourselves what system we live in and how we focus on the outcome, not the policy. The outcome we want is housing to be more affordable and more different kinds of people to live in cities and enjoy the economic growth within them.
I want people to be housed. I think that's the outcome, and I think that's the outcome that most of the people, even in this audience, and that most of the people out here want is we want people to be in a decent place so that they're not sleeping outside and getting sick, or so that they're not, an entire family is sharing a room the way you portrayed in your book, which it feels like such a tricky problem. But then sometimes I'm like, well, just put them in houses. But then again, when we don't have we have a housing shortage, where are we going to put them?
Well, right now, so what I was saying to people is, people say, oh, the Bay Area is anti-growth. I'm like, they're anti-housing. They sure don't have a problem with office buildings. In Palo Alto, they have about 4 jobs per housing unit. So Manhattan has 2.5. Manhattan, this place we think of as having a daytime population that's so much larger than the nighttime. Palo Alto's about twice as bad as that. That's a decision that was made by their own government. They decided to put a whole bunch of different kinds of offices and other kinds of things that attracted tons of employees to that place, and not to build housing for them. And so the really bad traffic and all that, I say look in the mirror, right? You can't create a land use pattern like that and then be surprised when the traffic shows up. So And we should remember, like lots of different people come to the Bay Area for the opportunity to capture economic growth, to get a
Work.
better job.
Right.
And they run the spectrum. They are immigrants who are coming here to kind of get their first toehold in typically the service sector. And then there are immigrants who are engineers, and then there are non-immigrants that are both. And I think that we have to be realistic that if we're going to create that level of opportunity and no housing with it, we're going to get the problems we have.
Well, we have a really engaged audience. Thank you
Yes.
for guys participating. And so I'm going to go to another question just because we were talking about the governor. So this one is asking, what are the chances that state government in California will act on opening up zoning for more and higher density housing, given that cities, including San Francisco, refuse to act?
It seems to me that the chances of something are high. SB 50 was of course this bill that would have usurped local zoning power and allowed you to build 4-story buildings near transit and in certain kinds of school districts. That got killed. But like, if anybody watched the video, if you're the kind of person who watches Senate proceedings on the video, the second it died, Tony Atkins, the president of the Senate, went right up to her microphone and said, "We are going to pass something like this year. Be prepared to compromise because that's what we're going to do." Will that happen? I have no idea.
Yeah,
but
I
they've
feel
all
very
locked
cynical.
themselves into it. And then, as you pointed out in the beginning, Governor Gavin Newsom has, he's usually all over the place. Oh, I'm going to fix college and healthcare. Da, da, da. His last State of the State speech was like all housing, nothing else but housing.
Right.
So people have at least recognized that they've all put themselves on the line, and that suggests to me that they'll have to do something. I guess the thing I worry about is that they do something that's like vaguely symbolic and like not even remotely effective.
I mean, we saw the governor, hold these press conferences with emergency FEMA trailers out in different cities and saying, haha, this is where we're going to put, emergency shelter out and stuff. And so I think that's where people are saying, okay, is this going to translate to something substantial? And I don't mean to make you a genie.
No.
I mean,
I don't follow the political stuff, but I think that people are sick of living like this. And I think at some point they're going to have to accept that this was a long time. What's the saying? Bankruptcy happens gradually and then all at once. Like that's how the housing thing happened. And so we're going to have to slowly come out of it. And I think people it's like the stages of grief or whatever. Like they've now accepted, and the next step is whatever is the next step.
Right. There's another piece of your book. You take us to San Diego to talk about the hepatitis A outbreak that happens among people experiencing homelessness in different encampments and I guess shelters at some point as well. And you write that in the absence of an emergency, people had a tendency to get up and to get caught up in these big intractable issues like mental health and drug addictions and that basically surround the question of homelessness in California. But you go on to say that these things work better when patients aren't in a daily battle to figure out where they need to spend that night. That piece was really fascinating to me. It reminds me of our current situation as we start thinking about the coronavirus and what impacts that this virus may have on this potentially vulnerable population because of their underlying health conditions. I just wondered, tell me like why you took us to San Diego a little bit there, and like what does it take, I guess, to get. Does it take, a medical emergency to get homeless services?
The reason I liked San Diego was. It's not, so one of the most profound questions anybody has asked me on this tour was I was in Seattle and a woman came to the microphone and at the end asked me, what do you think the cost is to us being around so many people living in such destitution? Do you think we're slowly killing ourselves and killing our own humanity by thinking that's normal? And I just sort of said, I don't have an answer to that. Let's just all sit with that question for a second. I think that people walk through the degree to which we've accepted homelessness as normal is like insane. My colleague Thomas Fuller at the New York Times came here from Thailand, and like a great many correspondents who come to California, the first thing he does is go, "This is crazy," and he starts writing all these stories about homelessness. So I'm from San Francisco, and a number of my friends, kind of privately, and when I'm getting drinks, are like, "Oh, I see your guy discovered homelessness," as if like this was a rookie error. And I said to him, shame on him or shame on you for accepting this as so normal that nobody should be writing about this like true human tragedy that we walk by every day as if it's like totally normal and as if it's just like something that doesn't affect us. It's like, oh, I don't know how that happened, you know, whatever, right? I think obviously I think writing about it and being like, this is not normal, this is crazy, is the right thing to do. In San Diego, they had fallen into that same pattern. And then they have this hepatitis outbreak, and it was very concentrated among the homeless community. They immediately build all these shelters. By the way, they should have been building permanent supportive housing, but whatever. They're in triage. They build all these shelters. They build hand washing stations, bathrooms, all these things that people need.
And this was around like 2016, right? Or
yeah, it was around then. The tourism industry was freaked out that people didn't want to go to San Diego, right? So a bunch of local investors gave us substantial amounts of money to build this. And they built the housing right by the baseball stadium. They certainly didn't start worrying about where it was going to go. They're like, oh my God, it'll just go right there. You know, like, and I think that we kind of start to live this delusion that you can live side by side with total destitution and have it not affect you. And the hepatitis outbreak was, to me, an amazing example of people very viscerally realizing, like, oh my God, like that can't just be like right next to me and have it not like cross over into my life too, right?
when you say right next to me, you mean like literally proximity?
Well, I just meant like there's a lot of office buildings downtown. There's a lot of people who work downtown. There are, of course, a lot of condos downtown. There's a baseball stadium downtown in San Diego, and there's Kentlands just kind of interwoven with it.
Right.
And I think that just walking by that as if like it's not, you don't have some relationship with it. And
I see.
I thought the hepatitis was like a very vivid example of that's a crazy way to think. You do have this is your community as much as anything else is, and taking care of them is as much your responsibility as anything else in your community. And I thought that the hepatitis outbreak forced people to reconcile with this in a way that you can ignore for quite a long time until it starts to feel like a crisis. And I guess I just hope that we can accept that it's always a crisis, you know? It's always I read this book, I'm going way off topic here, but I read this amazing book once, probably like my favorite book, called Strangers Drowning. And it's a nonfiction book about people who almost have like a compulsion to help people so much that they can't like function in the world because there's always so many people who need so much help.
Everything feels like a crisis.
Yes, and she kind of talks about, the author, she talks about how for them it's always wartime. It's always they can't just even go through the world and see something, you know? I think that'd be a little too much, but we should probably look at homelessness and every day be like, oh my God, that's crazy, that's a crisis, you know? And I thought that the hepatitis thing kind of was people waking up to that. And so for me, just narratively, you know, I'm always looking for people doing things, and there was so much action so fast that I thought that it was a great example of people waking up.
Right.
And I just kind of hope we can wake up more every day.
Right. Well, it brings it back to like this idea of crisis, right? When you think about these like a natural disaster or an emergency earthquake or something, and the aftermath of an earthquake, people are united and saying we've got to do something, and so people are helping others despite whatever differences.
So the term homeless was used before the 80s. It almost always was used to denote people who had lost their homes in a natural disaster. And then it became to mean what we modern times talk about it right around 1980. to mean people who cannot afford or cannot find a home. So it's a weird way that kind of happened, that we don't think of it as a disaster. We just think of it as like a status.
Well, the disaster is affordability would be, right? I guess our current disaster, perhaps.
Yeah, and I always say mental health and drug addiction are reasons people find it hard to hold a home together. And I've spent a fair amount of time in homeless camps. Like, a lot of homeless people you meet, this is not universally true, but a large number of them don't have what I would call like the best bonds. Like, their family, they're sometimes estranged in some way.
Like relations.
Yeah, and it's hard to go through life alone, like you slip up once and some pretty bad things can happen to you.
Well, you're right that sometimes what they really need is for somebody else to care before they.
Yes, and also, there are other parts of the country you can go to, and they don't have like some smaller number of people with mental health problems. They don't have like a smaller number of people who find it interesting to lose themselves in chemicals. They just have lower home prices. Yeah, the other thing I always another little anecdote I always throw out to people is, how many people remember the movie Big with Tom Hanks? Raise your hands if you remember Big with Tom Hanks. It's the movie about the 12-year-old who goes to this little carnival game and asks if he can become big. And then he becomes big. And he goes home. And when he goes home, his mom is like, why is some 25-year-old in my house? And so she tries to hit him with the baseball bat. And then he wants to go spend the night at his friend's house, who's 12, but he can't do that because, of course, you can't bring like some 25-year-old dude home when you're 12. So they were trying to figure out where to go. So they go to New York. I think they're in New Jersey. But they're like 12, right? So they don't have any money. And they go to an SRO. And they give them a single room occupancy hotel. And they give them the sheets. And the guy is a scary looking guy who gives them the hotel room. And then they get up to the hotel room and there's no bathroom, no sink, just a bed, like a wire bed in a room. And they hear like a gunshot next door. And then it's like crazy. And he pushes the dresser because he's so scared. We used to have SROs like that all around the country. A lot more of our city used to look like the Tenderloin than currently does. And New York had them all everywhere in the Bowery. I think Chicago had an estimated like 40,000 rooms like that. That was our radically affordable housing supply. That was where people who were very close to the edge could live. You could be like a day laborer and have a mild drinking problem and still find a room for $5 or something. I mean, today's money, it might be 15 or 20 bucks, but you could get housed fairly easily. And maybe there were all sorts of problems with that. Maybe it should have been better, but it was like better than the alternative. And I think sometimes in our wish to always make things cleaner and neater and to redevelop neighborhoods so that they look nicer, we kind of forget that there's a role for lack of a better term, kind of like bad neighborhoods, that we need a really radical affordable housing supply. And that housing supply is not going to have like a bunch of PhDs living in it. But that's okay. There's a space for everybody in the world, and we don't have to think of those people as being substandard. Their neighborhoods do work. They have lives. They have...
I think what you're hitting at is integrated neighborhoods.
Yeah, but we used to have that. We used to have tons of SROs around America, and a lot of it's now condos and stuff like that. So we essentially got rid of our... I mean, you see movies like Big. Spider-Man used to live in an SRO. In the early comic books. So that used to be a piece of our housing supply that we just saw as normal and functional. Mm-hmm. And now we almost like don't want it. We think of it as a problem to be solved rather than an integral piece of our city.
That's super judgmental.
What?
A problem to be solved.
I think that people do see it that way. Clean up the neighborhood, like that, right?
But that's where people live, and some, like, I don't point to somebody else and be like, you need to live your life like this, and you need to live in this place like that.
But I think over time, we obviously made those decisions. I'm not saying you made them or I made them. I'm saying, people wanted things to look nicer and be nicer. And
People also wanted exclusion.
yeah, well, I think, yeah. At that time, almost everyone who lived in SROs was white. So it was at that time a different. If you go look at pictures of the problem, the homeless problem at that time, it looks quite a bit different than it does today.
I think exclusion can be based on social class,
Yeah,
and
100%.
how much you make and what you do.
No, they see it as a part of the city that needs to be, quote, cleaned up.
Yeah.
And anyway, I'm just saying, and that impulse doesn't on the whole feel wrong because things do look, at first glance, because things do look nicer. The property taxes go up, right? But you can delude yourself and you kind of forget, where do those people go? Do we have a role? Do we need housing like that? Do we need, and of course my answer is like yes, but I think that we did have that at one point and we destroyed it. Just like we used to build 6-story apartment buildings next to the Painted Ladies.
I want to squeeze in one more question from our audience. This person asks,
The city manager, I'm going to put him on the spot. The city manager of Lafayette is here.
Well, the city manager for Lafayette is also the interim city manager for the city of Oakland. But this person asks,
that was the best firing ever. Or no, it wasn't a firing, but yeah. Can you imagine you're at this little city and next thing you know?
Well, let me get this one thing in. Are we in an age of new aristocracy? And while we aspirationally want equality, realistically, we want to build socioeconomic walls. A truly gated city. Is this a story of tragedy? If not, what is a viable solution? So I think they're asking, are we in an age of new aristocracy while we actually say that we want equality? Are we really doing that?
So there are some things about our economy that have made it more unequal. And I don't know if I want to call them bad. The consequences of it are bad, but the forces alone, that the knowledge economy has become kind of the industrial powerhouse of our time. That's just like a fact that happened. We're not going back. So the question is how we bring more people into that or
Right.
to raise wages of people who work in the service sector. Some of that is going to be education and things like that. Some of that's just going to be like brute force policy, like raising the minimum wage.
I think sometimes people forget that wages matter when we think about paying rent.
Totally. So it's hard to say that we're not in a new aristocracy in the sense that our levels of inequality in this country are like on par with like a third world country. That's probably developing. What's the right term for that? Anyway, a much poorer, more unequal country. We are on par with that, and we've not had people this wealthy, except for in our past Gilded Age. So are we living in a new Gilded Age? Like I don't think you could make an objective case otherwise.
That's interesting.
The question is like what we do with that and how we get more people to participate in that and become part of the knowledge economy, which is going to be the industrial powerhouse of our time. I don't think we're going to like just all go backwards and start plowing fields with like mules or whatever. So we need a lot of government programs to do that. We need to build affordable housing. We need to maybe like revisit public housing. We need to raise the minimum, whatever. As Jerry Brown says, more this and more that. But the greatest invention that ever was invented for raising the economic, the life expectancy of people is cities. It's about a 10,000-year-old creation, and maybe I'm getting that wrong, but it's certainly thousands of years old. When was Babylon? 10,000 years-ish? Anybody know the answer to that? Anyway. Okay, so it's a couple thousand years old, anyway. Better than every government program is people come to these places, they learn stuff, they invent stuff, they meet their spouses, and all these ideas are exchanged, and civilization happens.
By cities, do you also mean maybe
I mean-
community?
Well, no, I mean big, dense, complicated cities. I mean, more happens in big cities. Big, and by big city, I mean like metro area, not like just city of San Francisco. I mean the whole Bay Area, all of Dallas, all of Houston.
Like a mega region.
Yes, these mega regions. Like if you look at at the productivity, which is how innovative we're being, just density alone accounts for huge amounts of productivity. So this is the thing we have that raises people out of poverty and raises them to the middle class and even to quite wealthy. Better than anything else, that thing does it. And this is true around the world. All of the world is urbanizing. A good amount of the growing middle class in China and India can be explained by urbanization alone. If you want to see a truly desperate, horrible, sad form of poverty, go look at rural poverty. It is more hopeless than anything you have ever seen in a city. Because you're like, how do you get out of this? I have no idea how you get out of this. In a city, you're at least like, well, we can do this, we can do this, here's a program, here's a school, and the book is called Golden Gates because we've erected a gate around our most prosperous, amazing cities in the form of high housing prices and high rents, a golden gate. And I think that is horribly, horribly unfair to our own Americans, to people around the world, people whose lives can be improved so substantially by just getting a shot to be in these places where all this innovation is happening. And I don't just mean the Bay Area. I mean, again, Minneapolis, Denver, not Houston, because they don't have any housing problems there. I mean, they do have housing problems, they do have poverty, but they have low they're doing well as American home prices go. Boston, whatever, pick your place. And Seattle, getting people into those places and more people in there is the best program we can have to raise our national well-being. And I think, can you imagine what it would have been like if Detroit, when it was the Silicon Valley of its time, Detroit, this place that symbolized so much middle-class affluence and the manufacturing economy, if it would have been like impossible to get to because nobody could live there because it was too expensive, or if Chicago was the same way, we might not have ever had a great migration, we might not have had all sorts of things that we now see as fundamental to our culture and our people. So I think that the best policy is to increase a bunch of housing so that we can put more people close to these industries. That might be a complicated process, but I think it's really important because I just don't know what we would look like as a country if it had been impossible, like I said, to get to Detroit when that was the Silicon Valley of its time. And so ultimately, I want these innovation engines, which are cities, to welcome more people. And this is also why, by the way, I know I have to end. A couple Silicon Valley people have said, oh, I want to go build a city in the middle of nowhere and it'll be the regulation-free city. That is like a completely stupid idea. And it's a completely stupid idea because it believes that the companies make the place, not that the place makes the companies. And I am firmly on the place makes the companies side of things. And I just think that our sense of tolerance, our sense of what kind of people, I mean, all the greatest things we think about our culture come out of people smashing together and disagreeing like crazy, and then finding ways to agree in cities. And all our ideas and all these other things come out of it. So that is what I think is the best policy program. Sorry.
No, that's great. Thank you so much for spending so much time
Thank
with us
you.
and sharing your insights.
Do we now...
Connor Doherty is the author of the new book, Golden Gates, Fighting for Housing in America. Copies of Golden Gates are available just outside the room, and Connor's going to be signing some of those books today. I'm Erica Aguilar, and on behalf of myself, the Commonwealth Club, Connor, thank you for joining us today.